2 months ago, this team didn't even look like they belonged in the NCAA tournament. Now, the Gonzaga Bulldogs are a very legitimate national title contender.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you all by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Folks, right now, new customers who join today will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Folks, we got a couple of mailbag questions to get to today to close out the show. We're going to talk a little bit about Nolan Hickman's strong performance over the last 6 weeks. We're going to talk about the future of the WCC, some of their coaches, some of the teams that could be coming in and out. But first, we got to talk about Gonzaga's legitimate national title aspirations, because for so much of this season, the conversation has been, let's just get back to the tournament. Let's make sure we do not end that streak, because we saw the streak of making the AP Top 25 end. Not as impactful of a streak, certainly, but it was a bit jarring to not see Gonzaga ranked inside the top 25 for over a month of the regular season. We saw this team lose more games than they've lost in a long time. We saw them in very legitimate situations where they don't have a quad one win. If they don't pick one up, if they don't beat this team, if they don't win out, if they don't do this, they may not get a bid into the NCAA tournament. The conversation centered around, will this team make it if they don't beat St. Mary's in Las Vegas? And then they didn't. They didn't beat St. Mary's in Las Vegas, but they had done enough up to that point in the last month of the season, including the win on the road against Kentucky, including the win against St. Mary's in Moraga, including the win against San Francisco at the Chase Center, that it got them a bid into the NCAA tournament, a higher seed than many expected them to get on the 5 line. And now, after an incredible weekend of basketball where they blitzed McNeese State and just ran them entirely out of the gym, where they then played a close half against Kansas and crushed them in the second half, 22-point margin of victory in the second half, 21 total after being down by 1 at halftime. Now we're looking at a Gonzaga team and thinking, is this the year? Is this realistically when it's going to happen? Because most people didn't even think the Sweet 16 streak would stay alive. And I'm not trying to criticize people for thinking that. I get it. I understand where this team was at. It was tenuous if they were even going to make the tournament. And I think a lot of people were like, just get into the dance. Let's avoid losing the first game. After that, we're kind of playing with house money. Here we are. Gonzaga not only wins that second game, it's technically an upset win, 5 over a 4 seed. And now they're in the Sweet 16. And now I think there's a lot of like that house money conversation. Like, hey, even if we don't win here, to have continued the Sweet 16 streak, to be in the position that we're in right now, is more than really everybody would have expected halfway into the season. But the Zags aren't done. They've got an incredibly tough matchup on Friday, 4:45 p.m., when that game will tip off Pacific time, against the Purdue Boilermakers, who are rolling right now. Absolutely dominated Utah State. 106-67 was the final score there. Made it look like complete cake to take down that Utah State team. If Gonzaga does manage to advance past Purdue, the path beyond that would be either number 2 seed Tennessee or number 3 seed Creighton, both incredibly tough teams for different reasons. Creighton is a fantastic offensive team with 4 really good players, not a lot of depth outside of that. Tennessee relies very heavily on Northern Colorado transfer Dalton Connect to do their damage, but they are a great defensive team. After that, of course, you got whoever you're going to see on the other side of the bracket, some combination of you'll see either Houston, Marquette, Duke, or NC State into the Final Four. And then the championship game, you'll see probably UConn, potentially North Carolina, Arizona, Iowa State, or Illinois. A couple other teams could be in that mix as well. So the path's not going to be easy, but it never is. There's never been an easy path to the national championship, even if you play in an 11 seed team to get to the national championship like Gonzaga did in 2021. Nobody's going to call that easy. Certainly wasn't. Jalen Suggs had to hit a 37-footer to send Gonzaga to that national championship game. But It's definitely doable. And I want to do here are some reasons why I think Gonzaga can win the national championship. We'll talk about a couple of reasons why they may not be able to, and we will get more into the specifics of Gonzaga's matchup against Purdue. We got a couple of other episodes that we're going to get really into the nitty gritty, looking back on that game in November, looking at what has changed, looking at what Gonzaga can do to win that one. But in terms of why Gonzaga can win a national championship, I think it starts with the point guard play. National championship winning teams have good veteran experienced guards. I feel like I'm a broken record. I say that so often on this show. I say it so often on Locked On College Basketball, but it is true. Teams win national championships with experienced guard play. Ryan Nembhard has been here before. He hung 30 on Baylor last year as well with Creighton, of course, to get them advanced into the Sweet 16, nearly to help lead them to a win over San Diego State as well. He has been here before, and the way he has played lately, unbelievable. Last 10 games for Ryan Nembhard, 13.5 points, 9.5 assists, 4.7 boards, 2.5 turnovers, 1.3 steals. Those turnover numbers are actually a little bit inflated from his tournament games. He's turned the ball over a little bit more than he had in the games previously, but still to be averaging 9.5 assists and 2.5 turnovers in his last 10 games, incredible stuff from him. He's also shooting 40% from three and 53.5% from two. He is incredibly efficient. That short mid pick and roll that they're running, where they run the pick and roll a step or two in from the three-point line so that if defenses go under, Nembhard doesn't have to shoot a three. He's shooting like a 14, 15-footer. That has worked really well. Will it work against the very long arms of Zach Edey? Hard to say. The Zags didn't really have this in the arsenal when they played them last time. That, I think, creates a unique advantage. You can bet Matt Painter and Purdue is going to be ready. They're going to be watching the film. They're going to be figuring out how to stop that. And Edey's so tall and long that he might be able to. But Hunter Dickinson's pretty tall and long too, and he didn't do it. He wasn't able to stop it. So that, to me, is a huge key, is how Nembhard can continue to play and navigate that pick and roll. Of course, Graham Ike and his dominance throughout the last half of this season is a huge part of it. Obviously, he's got really tough matchups coming up. He'll take on Zach Edey if they do manage to advance. He either takes on two-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton, or he takes on Jonas Aidoo and one of the best defensive teams in the entire country in Tennessee. But Graham has been very good. He scores in isolation as good as anybody in the country. He's gotten better at making that pass out when he's getting double-teamed. Again, the matchups are tough right now, but he's the guy I want getting the basketball in those situations. We'll talk more about Nolan Hickman in the second segment, but obviously he's a huge key for Gonzaga as well with the way he's been shooting the basketball as a secondary creator. And then just the tenacity of the way that Anton Watson and Ben Gregg have played. Both these guys have been awesome in the first two NCAA tournament games. Anton Watson is this team's leader. He's their emotional leader. He's their leader on the court, and he has played exactly like that guy, exactly like the player you want him to be in March. And Ben Gregg has been nothing short of phenomenal. 15 points and 9 boards against Kansas. He did not miss a shot from the field in that one. Just the way that those guys are playing on both ends of the floor is vital. And then the last thing, coaching. Mark Few's a really good coach. He makes really good in-game adjustments. We saw that against Kansas. We've seen that in a handful of other games this year where they make adjustments. They change the way they're doing things when they see things that aren't working, and it works for them. Last time Gonzaga had a lead against Purdue, and they lost it in the second half. I think that Mark Few's coaching job this year has put this team in a much better position and could lead to them finding advantages against this Purdue team. Now, quickly, a few reasons why Gonzaga might not be in a great position to potentially win at all. Depth concerns and foul trouble. If something's going to trip Gonzaga up before they make the national championship game, it's going to be that. And frankly, Purdue's probably the best team, the team most likely to do that because of Zach Edey. If Graham Ike is sitting, and Graham Ike sat for a huge chunk of the game against Kansas in the first half. And of course, Gonzaga won that game, but they weren't winning at halftime. So that's going to be a factor here. If Graham Ike is in foul trouble, if Anton Watson's in foul trouble, if Ben Gregg's in foul trouble, if more than one of those guys are in foul trouble, this team's in trouble. Braden Huff's been playing much better as of late. I don't want to say that him having to play first half minutes is a nightmare situation for Gonzaga necessarily, but he's not very good defensively. Nobody's going to do a great job against Zach Edey in particular in this game, but you can't have a situation where Braden has to play less aggressive because he can't get in foul trouble because he knows that Graham Ike is in trouble. That is the worst case scenario for Gonzaga, is Braden Huff having to play soft defensively against Zach Edey. They'll double team him, and they should double team him, but the Purdue shot 41% from three this year. So they're gonna knock down their threes if they're getting double teamed. So to me, that's the biggest issue. Dusty Stromer's played great as of late, but that needs to continue. There cannot be a lull for Dusty Stromer. He doesn't really get to have a bad game. Nobody on this team does. Stromer certainly does not. Braden Huff certainly does not. If these guys go to the bench early with foul trouble, big problem for Gonzaga. The other issue is the three-point shooting. It's just not been consistent. For most of the year, it was flat out bad. In the second half of the year, it was better, but still a little inconsistent. They're going to need it. They're going to need it. They're not going to take 32 threes like they did against Purdue back in November. They're going to have a different game plan. I'm almost positive of that. But they're going to need to knock down threes when they are given three-point opportunities. Teams are going to find ways to neutralize Graham Ike. We're playing the best of the best. There's 16 teams left in this tournament. They're going to find ways to slow down Graham Ike. Hickman and Nembhard, and not even just the guards, Stromer and Greg and Watson, those guys are going to need to hit threes. Huff, they're going to need to be able to knock those shots down. That's critical. And then Gonzaga's defense. Is it good enough? KenPom has them 41st in adjusted defensive efficiency. No team has won a national championship with an adjusted defensive efficiency of 22 or worse, or 23 or worse, I should say. Now, if Gonzaga were to rattle off wins against Purdue and Tennessee or Creighton and Houston and UConn and won the national championship, their adjusted defensive efficiency is going to climb way up. Would it climb all the way up to 22? I don't know. But the point is right now, Gonzaga's defense is not at the level of most national championship teams in the KenPom era. Can they improve? Can they find ways to lock down opposing players? Is Dalton Knecht going to go crazy against them if they play Tennessee? What are they going to do against Edey? The defense is definitely an area that Gonzaga is going to need to prove that they can play at an elite level over these next few games if they want to go dancing. Well, there's 15 other teams in the NCAA Tournament Sweet 16 outside of Gonzaga. We're going to rank them, rank those teams that are still dancing. We're also going to discuss a little bit about Nolan Hickman's incredible March and how he has performed as of late. All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it is time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on spreads, money lines. You can even pick who you think's going to win it all. Right now, as I'm recording this, the Zags are 4.5-point underdogs to Purdue for Friday's matchup. If you're feeling confident, if that just made you feel like, heck yeah, we're winning that game, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time or you get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Taking a few mailbag questions here we didn't get to on Monday's shows. We wanted to recap that Kansas win, talk a little bit about Purdue, and talk about the women's basketball team and their win over UC Irvine. But I wanted to take these questions here. This first one comes from Thors via Discord, who says, okay, so we know Gonzaga tops the list, but how do you rank the rest of the 15 teams remaining? Yeah, so I always like doing the re-ranks here in the Sweet 16, kind of looking at some teams that have been off to a little bit of a hotter start in the tournament, maybe exceeding expectations, or maybe some of those top teams that haven't fared as well. And this tournament has been incredibly chalk. For those of you who have been paying attention, all 4 1 seeds in the Sweet 16, all 4 2 seeds are in the Sweet 16. You got 2 3 seeds, 2 4 seeds. Gonzaga is one of the worst seeded teams in the Sweet 16, and they're a 5 seed. That is incredibly rare. The only teams seeded worse than Gonzaga coming into the tournament were a 6 seed in Clemson and an 11 seed in NC State. Shout out the ACC conference many people thought was complete trash this year, and they have 4 teams in the NCAA tournament. That's more than the Big 12. That's more than the SEC. That's more than the Big 10. Really good stuff from the ACC. But so with so many teams that were already 1 seeds kind of coming in, the seeding hasn't actually changed that much. The question asked me to seed the 15 teams remaining, so I'll exclude Gonzaga from this. Starts at the top with the 2 of the 1 seeds, UConn and Purdue. Purdue's playing great right now. I know they're Gonzaga's matchup, and certainly Gonzaga's been hot as of late as well, but man, Purdue has looked really good in those first two games. They're playing some of their best basketball. UConn is absolutely incredible. They are the clear number one in my mind. So you go UConn, Purdue, and then I actually have Iowa State, who is in UConn's region, incidentally, the 2 seed. They're the top 2 seed in this field in my mind, and I actually have them third in a re-rank of all the teams in the field right now. Then I have North Carolina, the 4th 1 seed coming into the tournament. They have played great in their first couple of games, took down a good Michigan State team that obviously wasn't seeded very well because of their struggles in the regular season, but you never want to play Tom Izzo in March, and Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels moved on. And then I got Houston, the final 1 seed. And the only reason they're so low is because they barely snuck by Texas A&M, the 9 seed. And Texas A&M, one of the weaker teams in the field. They were the worst 3-point shooting team, and they played great. I mean, shout out to Texas A&M and Buzz Williams. They played phenomenal, but Houston looked incredibly vulnerable in that game. It could be a rally of the troops moment where Houston turns around and crushes Duke and crushes Marquette and ends up still in the Final Four. I wouldn't be shocked by that at all, but right now I got them a little bit lower. Then I got 3 consecutive 2 seeds all coming in next. Arizona, Marquette, and Tennessee. Arizona is at the top of the list. They're playing great right now. I think they're a little vulnerable against the Clemson team that is also red hot right now. But Tommy Lloyd's team offensively in particular, really tough to stop. A lot of the same set of Marquette, a little bit vulnerable right now, but granted they're playing NC State. Shout out to NC State for being in this position, but that's a pretty favorable matchup for Tyler Kolek, Shaka Smart, and Marquette. And then I got Tennessee as the 4th 2 seed on this list. They looked a little vulnerable against Texas as well. This team's just really reliant on Dalton Connect. It feels like if he has an off night, they're susceptible of losing to just about anybody. And I think there's a real chance they lose their next game to Creighton, who is who I have next on this list. The Blue Jays needed overtime. They needed double overtime to get by Oregon. The Ducks there nearly took them down. Really good stuff from Dana Altman's team, but Creighton survives. They advance. They're still in this field. I think they have a good chance against Tennessee. I got Illinois after that. Their offense is phenomenal. The best offense in the country right now, and it's not that close, but they are not good defensively, and you need to be good on the defensive end of the floor if you want to advance. So I got Illinois down here. I don't think they get by Iowa State, even with that elite offense. Duke and Clemson, the ACC schools here next. Duke, tough matchup against Houston, but they have handled their business. Sure, they played a 13 seed followed by a 12 seed in James Madison, but they blew out both those teams. They're playing good basketball right now. Clemson, nice run from them to take down the 11 seed in their region, as well as to move on and take on Baylor, beat Baylor in that one. Really nice game from Clemson's team. I think they're playing really good basketball right now. Could reasonably take down Arizona. And then you got Alabama. I'm not a big Bama fan. Their defense is just not very good. I have them a lot lower than I think most people would right now. San Diego State, second to last here. They are not going to advance unless they stun the world and beat UConn. And then NC State, once again, shout out Kevin Keats' team. They're fun to watch. This run has been incredible, but they are the weakest of the 16 teams remaining. But hey, I'd rather be the weakest the 16th best team in the country than not be in this spot. So shout out to them for being here. Next question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, how great has it been to see Nolan Hickman finally show up in March? This year has started slow and built to bigger things as the year has gone on rather than the other way around. Yeah, Hickman really struggled in his freshman year at the second half of the year. That's really common for freshmen. So it wasn't something that was super alarming. I mean, he was only a bit player as a freshman anyway. He was playing behind Andrew Nembhard, and they just kind of benched him in the second half of the year because he just wasn't contributing. Last year was more of an issue. He started the season as the starting point guard. They kind of had to rotate things around as they struggled to get actual point guard play out of him. By the time the tournament rolled around, he was more or less a non-factor. I think he scored 8 total points in the NCAA tournament. 6 of them were against Grand Canyon. 2 of them against TCU. Did not score against UCLA or UConn. So to see him now in this position, here's what Nolan Hickman's put up in his last 12 games. 15.5 points, 2.9 assists, 2.5 boards, 0.9 turnovers. He's shooting 51.5% from 3, 52.5% on 2. So basically the same percentage from 3 and from 2. He's also shooting 96% from the free throw line. This dude has been red hot for the last, this is not just March, this is going all the way back to February. He has been incredible. If he continues to be this reliable floor spacer, this secondary ball handler where he can create, if Ryan Nembhard's unable to run the pick and roll, and this is something I think could reasonably come up against Purdue. even if they run that short pick and roll, if Nembhard can't create enough space from Zach Edey, even if Edey's going under the screen, if he can't create enough space because of how long Edey is, and frankly, because Ryan Nembhard is not very big, they could try to run this with Nolan Hickman. And he has played well enough lately to be able to run that pick and roll, get to his spots, get his actions, make those reads, whether it's making the dump down pass to Graham Ike, whether it's, getting a step back and hitting a jump shot, whatever it may be. The way he has played lately, he can take on that role from Ryan Nembhard if they need him to. This was not an option for Gonzaga last year, and it may not have been an option for Gonzaga earlier in this season, but it is 100% an option for them right now. He is also the team's clear best floor spacer, valuable as a three-point shooter. He is valuable in the clutch. It seems like whenever Gonzaga needs a big shot, Nolan Hickman is there to knock it down. That is the kind of player you desperately need to be firing on all cylinders when you're in March. 2 years in a row, he was not that guy. This year he is, and it's one of many reasons that Gonzaga is in the position they're in right now to potentially advance the Elite Eight after, again, not looking like a team that even belonged in this tournament a month ago. Well, folks, did Grand Canyon's run to the Sweet 16 potentially help them get into the WCC, make them a priority for Commissioner Stu Jackson? We got thoughts on that and more. But first, this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest. And just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level, the Yukon Huskies. Folks, they can only be described as a Nissan Pathfinder. They have been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after cruising past Northwestern to get back into the Sweet 16. No team has repeated as national champion since Florida in 06 and 07. In fact, no team has advanced past the Sweet 16 the year after winning the national championship since then. Can Danny's Hurley's team do it? Folks, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, folks, closing out the show today with a couple more mailbag questions here. This first one, they're WCC related. First question here comes from Jeff again via Gmail. Jeff says, when is the WCC going to bring in Grand Canyon? The way the fan base travels for games, the financial support Grand Canyon has is impressive. They'd be a top 4 or 5 seed in the WCC. I'm going to quote my friend and my colleague, Spencer McLaughlin, the former host of the Locked On Pac-12 podcast, RIP, currently the host of the new Locked On College Football podcast. Check that out if you have not done so yet. We got Locked On College Football and Locked On College Basketball now. Spencer's also the host of the Locked On Ducks podcast for what it is worth, but he did a lot of shows during his Pac-12 run about conference realignment. Obviously, that was a huge storyline. And he said that he wants this embedded on his gravestone because he said it every single show. Presidents vote on conference realignment. And I think that is an incredibly critical, important thing to remember for any conference realignment conversation, but especially for a conference that is religiously affiliated and has intense values outside of sports in the West Coast Conference. Because Grand Canyon institutionally is nothing like the other schools in the WCC. And that includes Oregon State and Washington State, who are joining temporarily. And yes, the additions of Washington State and Oregon State being schools that are not Jesuit, Catholic, religiously affiliated programs, not anywhere close to the same size as the other schools in the institution, in the conference, probably does change this conversation a little bit. I would be naive to not say that it has an impact on it. And of course, people will point out that BYU is not Jesuit Catholic by any stretch. They're also a much bigger institution. But BYU was an exception. And really, both these situations where the WCC had the ability to strike and add a program that is a bit above the typical pay grade you'd expect in the West Coast Conference. The ability to add BYU was very important for this conference financially. It was very important for this conference from a reach and just overall brand awareness perspective. And they were able to kind of vote them in despite knowing that they didn't quite fit institutionally. Washington State, Oregon State, again, a huge opportunity to add 2 programs in the West Coast geographically that fit perfectly in the conference, that are huge brands. The opportunity would have been ridiculous to pass up for Stu Jackson. But Grand Canyon isn't on that level. They don't have the brand recognition. They don't have the lengthy success of a BYU. And they're not only not a small Jesuit Catholic religiously affiliated school, they're a for-profit, money-making, predatory college. I mean, to be perfectly honest, their business model is pretty gross. And it's predatory, and there's lots of lawsuits of students feeling like they were tricked into going there and having to pay more money than they were told. Like, it's easy to look this up and find this information out there. And while the basketball edition of Grand Canyon totally makes sense, you remove everything else, boom, it is obvious. They are the best West Coast basketball program that is in a conference that is equal to or inferior to the WCC. There is no question about it. I love Seattle U. I think there's some potential intrigue with programs like Cal Baptist. Maybe they could try to poach something from the Big West, although that's tougher because a lot of those Big West schools have football programs. But the clear best basketball program that the WCC could add on the West Coast is Grand Canyon. There's no debate. There's no debate. They come in here, they beat St. Mary's in Spokane. The crowd was electric. The student base is huge and popular, but the school is so far misaligned from the rest of the WCC that I have a hard time seeing the presidents of the schools choosing willingly to accept a school that is that different and that is in that position from a PR perspective, from a just an institution perspective, from what these schools value academically and institutionally. I just think that is going to supersede the athletic benefits that you would get from adding a school like Grand Canyon. And therefore, I think they're going to strongly hesitate to do it. I don't think they're going to necessarily immediately rule it out, but it is not as simple as they're a good basketball program, let's toss them in the WCC. A lot more going on than that. Final question of the show here comes from Austin via Discord. Austin says, you mentioned on a previous episode LMU hiring Lorenzo Romar as an assistant. It got me thinking with some big schools coaching vacancies. Do you see Chris Gerlufsen staying at San Francisco or leaving for one of those bigger schools? I think he's good enough. What do you think? Coaches don't typically get poached until they win an NCAA tournament game, or at the very least make the NCAA tournament. Todd Golden didn't get poached from San Francisco until he led USF to the NCAA tournament overtime game against Murray State. They didn't even win that, and yet he got that job at Florida, obviously led them to the tournament this year in a heartbreaking loss to Colorado. But typically you have to get to that level. I agree, Chris Gerlufsen's a great coach. I don't see any obvious fits for him right now. I did write about him as a potential candidate to take some jobs for USA Today. At the time, I was writing about potentially a fit at Minnesota. This was during the season. Minnesota actually finished the year pretty strong, and I don't think they're going to let go of Coach Ben Johnson. But just in the last 24 hours as I'm recording this, Mark Byington, the head coach at James Madison, he took the job at Vanderbilt. Kyle Smith, of course, the head coach at Washington State, also former San Francisco head coach, he took the job at Stanford. Chris Holtman went from Ohio State to DePaul. A lot of these jobs are filling up. And he's not going to go to Louisville. He's not going to go to Kentucky if they were to fire John Calipari. He's not going to go to any of the other big Oklahoma State. I mean, that would be a very surprising hire in my mind if he were to go there. That's one of the other big openings that's out there right now. Darian DeVries is a great coach at Drake. He took the West Virginia job. That's another one to mention there. So I don't see any obvious fits for him right now. Washington State is probably the most obvious fit that exists. And again, it would be the pipeline of Kyle Smith going from San Francisco to Wazoo. But at this point, why would Chris Gerlufsen leave a WCC coaching job in San Francisco to go coach for the WCC in Pullman? I don't think he would do that. It's a lateral move, especially where you don't know what the future looks like for Wazoo. They're going to be in the WCC for 2 years. Where are they going to be after that? We can have a longer conversation later in the offseason about Wazoo and kind of the precarious position they are in right now as they try to fill a head basketball coaching role where they don't, they're going to be in the WCC for 2 years, and then they're going to be, who knows after that. I think it's going to be hard for them to find a coach. I don't think Gerlufsen would take that job. Stanford would have made some sense. I could have seen that happening, but it is, of course, full. So at this point, no. I think he comes back. I think he tries really hard to get this team back into the NCAA tournament. If he does, I think he's gone. I think as soon as this team makes the big dance, he's probably going to get another job, and he's probably going to be entirely deserving of it. But I don't think it's going to happen this offseason. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. This is being recorded before Gonzaga takes on Utah, the women's team. We're going to have a recap of that game on a future episode, talk about Gonzaga's upcoming opponent, assuming they get past the Utah Utes. We'll have all that. We'll also have more conversation about this upcoming matchup against Purdue, what Gonzaga can do against Zach Edey, all sorts of good stuff coming your way. Thanks to those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you to join us on the Discord channel. Some of you have pointed out the link has not been showing up in the show notes. I apologize for that. It is there today. So if you would like to join our Discord channel, you can find that link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. I promise. Thanks again to listening. We'll be back on back on Wednesday with more getting you ready for this big week of Gonzaga hoops. Thanks again. Until next time, as always, Go Zags.